I'm reading today from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda, based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's reading is, What is it to fail spiritually? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The first passage is from the Gospel of St. Matthew. Jesus tells the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 of them wise and 5 of them foolish. They await their bridegroom, the Christ consciousness. The wise virgins keep the oil in their lamps, symbolic of their devotion, lit through the night. The foolish virgins placed no oil in their lamps. These foolish ones are like the average devotee, going through the motions of outer ritual, but keeping no fire of love burning in the heart. When the bridegroom's coming is announced, the foolish virgins realize their mistake and hasten out to purchase oil. During their absence, the Christ consciousness comes and embraces those who have been awaiting him with devotion. The foolish ones, by their lackluster devotion, are not accepted by him. Watch, therefore, Jesus told his listeners, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of God cometh. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda describes the foolish virgin consciousness he encountered in the Mahamandal hermitage he stayed in as a young man in Benares. I was pleased, he wrote, that my new home possessed an attic where I managed to spend the dawn and morning hours. The ashram members, knowing little of meditation practices, thought I should employ all of my time in organizational duties. They gave me praise for my afternoon work in their office. Don't try to catch God so soon. This ridicule accompanied one of my early departures toward the attic. Later, during meditation, I felt uplifted as though bodily to a sphere uncircumscribed. Thy Master cometh today. A divine womanly voice came from everywhere and nowhere. This supernal experience was pierced by a shout from a definite locale. A young priest named Habu was calling me from the downstairs kitchen. Mukunda, enough of meditation. You are needed for an errand. The Divine Mother's words were not spoken for the benefit of that priest, the foolish virgin, but for Mukunda, the wise virgin. For this was the day his guru, Sri Yukteswar, came to him. Grieve not, friends, if you feel that you have been foolish. No error is forever. Someday, if you keep your lamp lit now, your opportunity will come. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 6th chapter, Krishna promises every devotee, O Arjuna, none who works for self-redemption will ever meet an evil destiny. Spiritual failure, though a deep disappointment, is always temporary. Eternal hellfire is but a projection of vindictiveness in the human mind. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Recently, we came across a copy of an article that Sister Gyanamata had written for Yogananda's magazine in 1935. This magazine was called Inner Culture. And That's what I have here in my Ray's book. And it's a very good article. It's very short, but she, at the beginning of it, quotes Meister Eckhart, who was trying to write his Christmas sermon in the 14th century. And Meister Eckhart is quoting St. Augustine, who was, of course, writing in the 5th century. And St. Augustine is saying that Christ was not just born centuries earlier, it's an eternal birth. It's always happening in our own hearts. That Christ consciousness, that universal spirit, is always striving to be born within us. And Meister Eckhart is saying, but if it's not happening in me, then what does it profit me? I want to feel it in my own heart. That's where it makes a difference. That's where it's real. He wants it to be in his own heart, that birth of that magnificent, loving, eternal consciousness. And so Gyanamata starts by this quotation, and then she tells a story. It's like a waking vision, a spiritual experience. And she sees herself standing in a house that she used to have, that she says that I will never see again except in poignant memories. And she sees herself standing in front of a window, looking out at a cherry tree. And she said it must be winter because the cherry tree's branches, though beautiful, are bare. And as she's looking at this bare tree, she feels the depth of despair. And she wonders, Lord, am I never going to feel your presence within me? Is nothing to be born of this life? And she soundlessly hears these words in her soul. And the words are, everything that is born in time must mature in time. What good would it avail you if you were to go out under this cherry tree and weep and say, I demand cherries right now? And so then she sees these pictures in her mind's eye. She sees the cherry tree with its bare limbs washed in rain and then drenched in sunshine. And she sees the buds starting to open and they blossom in this pink glory, she says. And then she sees the leaves and the hard green fruit. And then in the last picture, she sees under the tree many, many baskets filled with glorious red, ripe fruit. And I'll read this last paragraph just because it's so beautiful. As with the tree, so with the eternal birth of this Christ consciousness in our hearts. In darkness, in the rain of sorrow, in the sunshine of joy, the new consciousness is taking shape in you. On a day that may be distant, but is sure. It will come, it will be born, and you shall enter into the golden consummation which you have sought through many, many lives. Believe, stand firm, and you shall see the glory of the Lord. And that's what we need to do. We need to stand firm. We need to be positive. We need to not take our eyes from the goal. It's so easy in this world, especially if you're like me and you look at your phone and you see the news and you read some of it, and it's heart-wrenching, it's heartbreaking, it's an endless stream of political games and power-mongering, and it just goes on and on and on. I don't have to tell you about it. You can read about it any day. And I've started really disciplining myself and saying, no, I'm sorry. You can't spend more than 15 minutes at this, and that's it for the day, because the world sucks you in. And the world is always the same. I personally think it's more distracting than it's ever been before. But that's part of this age of energy. Things are speeding up. Things are getting more and more diverse. And it's also a war happening, as I've often said, a war between lower consciousness of Kali Yuga and a higher consciousness of Dwapara Yuga. And so what we see is that war of darkness and light. Look to the masters. Look to, as Yogananda would often say, using the analogy of a movie, back when there was a projector which cast a beam of light onto a screen, he would say, see how engrossing the movie is, but turn your gaze to that beam of light, that spiritual eye, where the consciousness, the Christ consciousness, resides. What can we do to lift ourselves up from spiritual failure? Because everyone I know feels like they don't meditate well enough. They don't do enough spiritual practice. They're caught in Maya. They have faults. There are so few of us who are beyond all of that. And it's heart-wrenching. Just like Yanamata, we feel like maybe we haven't made horrible mistakes today, but we haven't achieved the realization that we want. What do we do? How do we live? How do we gain that? Well, the first thing is to realize that having been born in time, it takes time. I was rereading the passage in The Resurrection of Sri Yukteswar from Autobiography of a Yogi, in which it talks about the high spiritual beings of Hiranyaloka, where Sri Yukteswar reincarnated to act as a guide for these souls, every one of which had achieved Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the highest Samadhi. That's where they started. It was from Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And then they were going on from there. And Sri Yukteswar said that these high beings, like in Hiranyaloka, experience great pain. They're very sensitive. They experience great pain if they make a mistake in thought or in any perception of truth. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect, is quite a task. So we should prepare for the long haul and not feel as though we're not making any progress just because we didn't get hit with samadhi this morning when we meditated. I love that joke from the Buddhist tradition. Let's see if I can remember it on the spot here. It says something like, "The road to enlightenment is long. Be sure to pack a lunch." It takes a while. We just had a little excursion with a couple of friends, and it was a long drive there and a long drive back. And after some hours in the car on the way back, our companions both fell asleep, and Dharmadas was driving and I was in the back seat. And I was looking at my watch. The time just was not moving. We had another hour to go. And I thought, well, I could sit here and fuss. And then I saw, I have a P.G. Wodehouse book here. Let me just leaf through this. And I was sort of not very attentively. I was kind of skimming through the book, but it was humorous. It was one of those stories that was just painfully embarrassing because the guy, the hero who wanted to impress the girl, kept not impressing her, kept losing her dog and, letting her bird fly away. I mean, he just did all kinds of things that made her just hate him. But it was funny in its own way. And I looked up and we were home. And I thought, that's the way to enjoy the journey. Be positive, have fun, laugh, be in joy, give to others, and let God take care of it. Because really, she doesn't quote St. Augustine in this article, but another thing that he said was, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. This is what we are doing in this life. This is the purpose of our lives, is to find God, to find our rest in Him. And Meister Eckhart also, though it's not quoted in this article, he says, I move my hand and God moves, who is my hand. That's another way of saying the yogic principle that God is the doer. We have to wake up to that realization. We think that we know what we're doing, that we make our decisions, but it's our habits that make our decisions. The more that we can turn our hearts over to God and let Him work through us, I have been amazed at how He does work in my life. My job is many, many details, many, many details. And often I will think of these details that have been left undone just as I'm trying to go to sleep, which is a terrible thing. And I keep meaning to have a pad and paper next to the bed so I can just write them down, but I never remember. So I'm forced to say, Lord, I don't think I'll remember this in the morning. Would you please take care of it? And lo and behold, quite often, not always, but quite often, He will take care of it. And if not, He'll help me take care of it. So the more we turn our lives over to Him, the happier we will be, and the better things will get done. Things that we feel like we have to do. Our children, our parents, our spouse, our friends, our job is to love them and let God love through us. And the more that we have gratitude in our lives, the more we will be able to see that we are making progress. I read an article recently in which it was saying that through the studies that they have done, that people who experience and express gratitude regularly and often are happier and healthier. And I thought, well, that's a spiritual principle. Just to live in that thought of gratitude is a beautiful way to live. To be in awe of God's creation and to thank Him for that cherry tree, even if its branches are bare now in December. We trust, have gratitude and trust that that new life, new consciousness is being born in us. I'll just close with very briefly describing this story that happened with Ramakrishna, who was the guru of Vivekananda. And Vivekananda, I'll tell you about him another time at length, but he had a very rough go of it, very difficult life. And finally, through his devotion to his guru, to God, he did experience a samadhi. And Ramakrishna's response to that samadhi was, I'm taking it and putting it in my pocket. And when the time is right, after your work is done, then you will have it again. And in a sense, our spiritual growth is up to God. He has it in His pocket. When He knows the time is right for us, He will give it to us again. Our soul's destiny is what we had in the beginning. The next week's reading talks about the inheritance that has been yours from the foundation of the world. So our soul's nature, that realization, is our destiny. So let us trust God and give Him the keys to our samadhi, to our spiritual growth, and trust that He will give it to us at the right moment when He feels we are ready for it.
This topic reminded me of an episode in Sri Yukteswar's ashram, and Yogananda, I spoke recently about this on the anniversary of the 75th anniversary of the publishing of Autobiography of a Yogi this past week. My part of the program was to talk about the chapter Years in My Master's Hermitage, and the chapter's just chock full of amazing stories and teaching about discipleship and the disciple-guru relationship. But Master says that often people would express doubt about their own spiritual potential or their own spiritual progress. And Sri Yukteswar's response, in typical fashion, he just very flatly said, forget the past. The vanished lives of all men are dark with many shames. Everything in future will improve if you are making a spiritual effort now. And it's really helpful to remember, because even 5 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago, if we feel like, oh, well, but I didn't meditate very well this morning, or, it's like those little thoughts, they sort of build up as a kind of self-hypnosis to say, oh, well, I guess I'm not any good. I follow sports often, and I'm amazed. I don't know why I'm amazed, but I am amazed when I see how frequently two really good teams will be playing against one another, but something will unlucky will happen to one of them, and they will basically tend to give up before the end of the game. It's very, very rare that the game gets played all the way to the end and they both keep trying all the way to the very last. I mean, it's inspiring when it happens, and it does happen occasionally. But often, it's like, oh, well, we're going to lose anyway, so why bother? Why try? And we do that to ourselves often as well. And we hit a rough spot in our meditation or in our outward life in some way or another. And we think, oh, well, I screwed up. Just, might as well just get rid of that one. And this story, I was reminded of this story, very inspiring and a true story. In fact, I even brought the book here today, if anybody's curious to see it. The story is called Beyond the Pale of Vengeance. And it's a true story of a man in Japan from the 1700s who got himself entangled in an affair with a member of his master's household, which was a very bad idea, but it happened. And the master came to punish him, and he, being a warrior himself, a samurai, was trained. He was going to die. He was going to be executed by the master, but he got a scratch or a cut and started bleeding, and he just kind of went wild seeing the blood. And he defended himself, and he wound up killing his master. Well, the earlier sin was bad, but this one was like death for certain. Not only death, but a bad rebirth, and a trip through hell on the way to a bad rebirth. And so he escaped with someone from the household, and they took up a life of crime. And, used to rob people and kill them. And at a certain point, in horror, absolute disgust with this, he ran away. He literally ran dozens of miles until he ran out of steam right in front of a monastery. And the abbot of the monastery took him in, and he confessed his entire story to the abbot and basically asked the abbot, what should I do now? What can I do? And the abbot said, well, if you turn yourself in, because obviously he could see that this soul was remorseful, deeply remorseful. If you turn yourself in, you will be executed. And if you're executed, you're going to have a bad trip of it, basically. So why not spend the rest of your life working to expiate the sins you've committed? And so the man thought, well, I've got nothing else to do with my life. I might as well try. So he went off, and he came to a town, after traveling around for a while, in which there was a very dangerous path next to a river. And people would slip from that path and be drowned in the river. And it happened every single year. And he saw a way higher up where there's a rock, a piece of mountain. But if he could carve a channel through that mountain, he could create a safe path around this dangerous part next to the river. And so he started in with a hammer and a chisel. And he started bashing away at this mountain. And after 10 years, he had made it, something like 30 feet. And he had like 300 yards to go. I mean, he had hardly made any progress, but the villagers thought, well, this guy is nuts, but he's trying to do a good thing, so maybe we should help him. So they came out and they helped for a while. And then they lost hope. And meanwhile, he kept on going and going. And the drama continued because the heir to the master that he had killed earlier came to find him, to exact vengeance, to kill him in what's the word I want, to avenge his death, the death of his father. And he found this monk chipping away at a mountain and confronted him. And the monk said, yes, it's absolutely true. And he said, you are welcome to kill me. to avenge your father, but I would request that you let me finish my tunnel, because then if I've at least finished, then I will feel that my life has been of some use. And so the guy guarded him every day. He would come and sit there and watch. And after a few years go by, he's thinking to himself, well, why am I sitting here watching him? Let me help him. So he gets his own hammer and his own chisel, and he starts bashing away at the wall. And for another 10 or 20 years, they work at this thing, and the villagers come and go and, finally start really, really helping. And one night, and this guy, the monk, Ryokai, he works almost all the time. He sleeps just minimal amount. So he's working in the night, bashing away at this thing. And the two of them are together, he and this man who wants to kill him. And the monk breaks through the wall. His chisel goes all the way through to the other side, and there's air, and he chips a little more, and there's a burst of air blowing through. And he turns to the man and he says, kill me quickly, because if we wait till morning, the villagers will come and they will protect me. And the man can't do it. It's like he knows that this is a saint, in a way, who has been working at this. And it goes beyond that desire for, yes, the society said that he must do this, and etc. And at a certain level, it's like he was owed that. But that no longer fulfilled him. And if you think of all of us, in a way, are that monk. All of us, whether we've killed people or whatever. I mean, if you go back far enough, we've probably done all kinds of horrible things. But in this lifetime, I don't think we have anybody who's robbed and murdered people for a living for a long time. So we don't have 1,300 feet of granite to chip away in our lives, but we've got whatever we've got. Because the hypnosis of the action says, oh, but you're limited. I grew up in one of the Christian denominations, and we often thought that, with a little bit of cynicism, that those of other denominations, if they got to heaven at all, they were just going to get to their flavor of heaven. The Baptists were going to be in a Baptist heaven the whole time. And actually, there's a certain validity to that we create our own heaven or hell. We don't have to wait till after death to figure it out, to find out. I mean, we can look at our own consciousness right here and now and decide, well, let's see, am I in heaven or am I in hell, or am I stuck somewhere in between? I mean, all we have to do is examine our consciousness. And every hammer blow, every little thought that comes along is an affirmation of unlimited consciousness or of limitation. We're either building a palace or a prison, or possibly we're building a palace that will become a prison when it's too small for our consciousness. Kriya does not ask us, are you male or female? Are you single or are you married? Are you rich or poor? Are you Democrat or Republican? Are you anything in particular? It just simply asks, do you love the Lord? And are you willing to offer your energy up and actually practice? That's all it asks. All the rest of it is moved aside. And that's our chisel and our hammer, is to change our consciousness one breath at a time. And we build a consciousness that is unlimited. We remove the obstacle. We remove the mountain that's preventing us from knowing the divine in the most natural way, and without any fear, without any judgment, without any cynicism, etc. We just offer ourselves into that divine light. If you have Kriya, practice it with devotion, and you'll know this. Whether I say it to you or not, you'll know it for yourself. And if you don't have Kriya, take the Raja Yoga class starting in January and get it. Namaste.